you very much. Thank you, Mr. Van Hennix. It's a great pleasure to be here today, and thank you very much for this very warm welcome which I experienced here. I feel very honored to be part of the impressive list of speakers that you host here in Charlotte. I would like to say on this occasion thank you to my team. That's my honorary consul von Hennix. That is Mrs. Moltmann, the Consul General. That is certainly my wife that accompanies me, and my Chief of Staff, Barbara Schell. I cannot start and look at the relationship between the US and Germany and say a few words about what I think really matters in that regard before having addressed the children that are with us, the kids. Because I see that as a true investment into our future. It's fantastic to meet kids here in the US that learn German and that speak wonderful German, as I could hear this morning. And I must say, a small anecdote, when I presented my letter of credence, my credentials to President Biden, he addressed me and he said, "Ambassador, we have something in common." And if the president says to you, "We have something in common," that's kind of irritating in terms of symmetry. But he said, "We have something in common. We both married way above our station. We both married teachers." And I can only say, after being married to my wonderful wife for more than 40 years, during which she has worked as a teacher, that is a very important investment which we should not only support but cherish and commend on occasions like this. Let me say a few words about that relationship, which is part, of my job very much, the relationship between Germany and the US. And you have quoted very kindly, it is, at least the objective that I pursue to further deepen that relationship. But before you say a few words about how you would like to achieve that, I think it's important to look at where we find ourselves. And very clearly, we are cooperating at the moment in a very difficult international environment. It is not only difficult politically, security-wise, defense-wise, it is difficult also when you look at the economic and business side of things. And what has really struck me when I arrived here, and yeah, I have to look at Stephen Sokol, because next month I will attend the Munich Security Conference, and it was last year at the Munich Security Conference that we met against the backdrop of news that was circling that I would be honored and privileged to become the next German ambassador to the United States. Then I must say, I did not, although I worked as the equivalent of the deputy secretary in the Foreign Office, I did not fully grasp how that development, how that relationship had really moved to a quality level that we had never enjoyed. I think I can say that from the bottom of my heart, that we had not enjoyed since the end of the Second World War. There are other aspects of closeness, but what really matters here, and that's why I'm confident to say that we've reached a quality that is completely new in the relationship, that now I can see that our cooperation is not just, aspects of understanding so that we share values, that it is that we are part and members of the same alliance, that we as Germans very much depend on security support from the US. No, what is different now is that we have become probably on the Western side of things, when you look at global affairs, the closest allies, the closest in terms of concrete operational cooperation. Just to give you two examples. One, I think we will soon hear the ambassador of Ukraine here. When you look at Ukraine, not only is the US, of course, the largest supporter when it comes to military assistance and financial macroeconomic stabilization of Ukraine. That's what the US is, and we very much hope that the supplemental will be finally be adopted by Congress so that this continues. Germany we had a slow start, but Germany is now the second most important supporter in military terms and in financial terms, in terms of stabilizing through direct budget support the government and the economy of Ukraine. We have just doubled our military assistance in 24. So we very much feel we need to push against a certain fatigue that is spreading, because this is a confrontation we cannot afford to lose, and the closest partnership in that regard is the partnership between Germany and the US. Other example, more recent, tragic, terrible, you've heard I served as German ambassador to Israel, but I also served there as a junior diplomat. This country has a very special place in my biography and in my heart. And when you look at Israel and the difficulty of dealing with the Gaza crisis in diplomatic terms, that is also something where the US and Germany cooperate extremely closely. It's an operational cooperation, which is different from the way things looked, let's say, 10, 15 years ago. Because quite understandably, the US administration could have said, and would have said, when it comes to the Middle East, that's, really a theater where we know our ways, and we don't really need any specific support in that regard. That is different. That is different because it is a hand-in-glove cooperation that has developed. And when you look at the Israelis, because they have just conducted last week a poll in Israel, you realize that from the Israeli point of view, you absolutely mirror that cooperation. Because when you ask Israelis, who is your most important ally in the world, of course they say it is the US, and I would add in brackets, and then it's the US, it's the US, it's the US. But then the first other country on that list for Israelis is Germany. It is Germany, against the backdrop of our history, I think, and German promise. That is a very, very important and significant way of positioning themselves. So, what I would like to leave with you is that when it comes to defense, security, international policy, I think we've reached a quality of cooperation we have not enjoyed in the past, and this is not just applauding the relationship. You find so many concrete examples where this happens. Now, finally, a word about business, because most of you, I think, come from the business world. And certainly I feel absolutely honored to be here because before I even became ambassador to the US, I was told about a very significant German investment in South Carolina and in North Carolina. That this is a real hub for German business, and you know the figures much better than I do. So I'm very happy to be able to learn about this, what it really means, how far it goes in terms of making a difference here in the US. That German business that creates so many jobs. I was told it's more than 40,000 jobs here in North Carolina. So that is very, very significant, and it is something that for me kind of builds a platform on which we stand and from which we can continue that close partnership that we have. When I look, however, at the global state of affairs when it comes to business interaction and economic interaction, I can't hide from you that I'm also a bit concerned. That whole movement that has started, that whole discussion about economic security, is totally justified. You know, like Jake Sullivan, the national security advisor of the president, has clearly said or written in an article in Foreign Affairs, and I think on various public speaking engagements now also in Davos, you know, you can't look at the world of business anymore and look at macroeconomic developments without also looking at it from an angle of security. Now that is totally justified, and I think we do the same in Europe. Because here what really matters is what the European Union is doing, because we have simply ceded our sovereignty when it comes to trade and business to the European Union, so that's an aspect that needs to be looked at from that particular angle. And the European Union has also adopted policies with regard to economic security. The problem at the end of the day is, if we are honest with ourselves, that we've moved from free trade and firmly embracing the idea of free trade. I remember the 80s, I remember even the 70s in that regard. And I think here you can say, we are in the process of saying farewell to free trade. And I'm not entirely convinced that this reflects our common interests. I think what we really have to look at, because they are national policies that are taking over when it comes to the security aspects. It's of course in a national context, let's say on the US side, that these interests are being defined and the rules that apply. In the end, you have partners, alliance partners, that may see difficulties in competing with some of the companies that are privileged because they have a local foothold or because they have, let's say, another identity. Here I believe that we will have to discuss much more intensely how we can move to a new framework, which here I'm convinced, you know, it would be naive to think that this is again a free trade framework like we had internationally embraced and defined in, let's say, the 70s and in the 80s, but we will have to define a much broader base that allows for fair competition in an international context and still provides the room that is necessary to also look after security interests and other political interests of your country. Now the US has an important election campaign. You know, I live with two media worlds, the German and the US. I can assure you in Germany that will be the most important election in the understanding of all those that follow the most important elections we've seen for, you know, many, many decades. And while that campaign has started, or since the campaign started in Iowa now, with the candidate race, I think we clearly understand that this is not the time to look at defining some of the questions I've just raised. I think that is something for later. If there will be a next president, or there will be a next president, we will certainly have to raise some of these issues. What I, as ambassador, would like to achieve is that the relationship between Germany and the US, because it really marks a win-win for both sides, in spite of the asymmetry in terms of power and size, that this win-win relationship continues under all weather conditions. I think that is the most important job we need to do now and we need to achieve, because it's far too important for both sides to underperform in that regard. And may I add on this occasion, because you may also have followed the publication of growth figures or non-growth figures of the German economy last year. If you look at 23, you know, I could think of a more encouraging balance when it comes, or balance sheet when it comes to the German economy, shrunk by 0.3%. So I'm also frank enough to say this is a time where the German economy needs to tap growth in the US. There are so many opportunities also with regard to states like South Carolina, North Carolina. And if I'm not totally mistaken, I think I can see that German interest in, again, going for another push of investment here in the US is going up. And I think at the end of the day, that is very positive and to the advantage of both sides. So with this introduction, I'm very happy to be here. I'm very happy to be in Charlotte today. And thank you for having me.
We're not letting you away from the podium. Ambassador Michaelis, thank you so much for this really rich introduction. I think you've given us a lot of food for thought, and I certainly have dozens of questions to ask you. It is an honor to be able to lead the conversation with you right now, and I promise only to ask one or two, and then to open it up to all of you, because I think it's important for the ambassador to hear from you, and that includes the students here as well. When you ask a question, please make sure that you introduce yourself and state your affiliation so that the ambassador knows who he is talking to. Ambassador Michaelis, as I said, there are a lot of things I'm curious about, both in terms of domestic politics and in terms of foreign policy and global affairs. But I'd like to start maybe with something different. You've been in this position now for almost 6 months. And, you've been in this position now for almost 6 months, and you have already visited a lot of different parts of the United States. You were in Texas with the foreign minister, you were in California, you were in Pittsburgh, you were in Atlanta, and you're now here in North Carolina and South Carolina. I have sort of two questions for you. One is, what have you seen that surprised you? But the other is, why are you making such an incredible effort to get out of Washington and really sort of measure the pulse of what's going on in the US?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Steve. And indeed, that's, we do this on purpose. I do it on purpose. And I was tasked in this way by my government. Because what we would really like to achieve is to make sure that the pillars on which we stand in this relationship between Germany and the US are as strong as possible. And the pillars are certainly not just in Washington or just in Berlin, or if you want, in Brussels. They are, there are various pillars, and certainly here in North Carolina, Charlotte, given the size of investment and its political implication, is a very, very important pillar. So I'm very happy that I will be able to continue to Raleigh and see the governor, as I saw Governor Camp in Georgia, for instance. Because I think what we need to achieve, we need to reach out to people who understand the win-win that exists in the relationship and are able and willing to translate that into policy. I think that's what we are trying to achieve, and that's why I try to. It's not just about the ambassador. I think we have to see that we recommend to ministers who now come and visit the US, not just to go to Washington or to New York, but actually have a second destination. And so far, I can say the feedback is very positive. Those ministers that have visited, those that are now coming in the next weeks, they all include another destination here in the US.
And you didn't even mention the election as well. I mean, I think it's clear that in the run-up to the election, you're also making a concerted effort to really get out into the country, and that is to be welcomed. You talked just now about the firm foundation. You talked earlier about the common values that we have, but also the shared interests and the shared goals that we have. And you spent some time in your remarks talking about the state of the transatlantic economic relationship. One of the national laws here, the Inflation Reduction Act, was well regarded when it came out in Germany, at least among the people that I was speaking with. They felt that the US was finally taking climate change and the environment seriously. But then that very quickly changed into a bit of a response where people were saying, this looks like a protectionist act. It looks very much like an America First type. And yet when you speak with business people in Germany, they talk about the kinds of opportunities that you were describing that exist here in North Carolina and South Carolina for them as businesses. In your role as ambassador, how are you navigating sort of the feedback of the IRA?
Thank you for that question, which I have to admit is a difficult one. It is a difficult one because already in Berlin, when I was discussing with my state secretary colleagues, we said we would like to have a very, very sound assessment, deep assessment, analysis of the implications of the Inflation Reduction Act, the impact on German business. German business that has set up business here, that has business here, and German business that may feel attracted to move to the US. And you will understand, I think there is a very clean line that is important for us, because we are a German government. So I don't want to lose German jobs. I don't want to lose significant investment that has a tradition in Germany, because companies suddenly realize that it's much better to relocate to the US and service the global market from here. That's just my job description, because I'm a German ambassador. So that's a line, once it's been crossed, where I would start to ask questions. Because then either we are underperforming, so understand my question, maybe we have to set up a better platform to be able to keep business and attract business in Germany, and the other may be that we are looking at the Inflation Reduction Act and that we find kind of inbuilt incentive schemes that are just not as level as they should be. And there are some. You will all know from speaking to colleagues, if you are not part of the German car industry or suppliers that work with the German car industry, there was a lot of concern on the part of the German car industry with regard to IRA. And I can understand those concerns. We are further pursuing it, but at the same time as these automotive companies also invest and continue to invest in the US, they also profit from relevant subsidies under the IRA. If you take everything together, and I think that has been analyzed by the German chambers, and I think it was New York who last did it, you realize that the reasons why companies suddenly start producing in the US, there is support through IRA, but it is not the determining factor. There are other reasons, market size, regulation, energy price, etc., that are at least as important as that factor. So from that point of view, I think we as a government still feel the jury is still out. As I've said, the German economy is a bit weak at the moment at home. I think it is not only justified, I think it is right to grow with another economy that grows at a much higher rate. So if it is about this transition, positive, and the green transition that happens here in the US, I think in a global perspective, is something we absolutely support.
So the Energiewende, the energy transformation, is certainly another topic that we could talk about. Yeah. And as I look around for a question, let me just ask a follow-up though on the economic question, which is, I think many people, when they consider the volatility and the complexity of today's foreign policy arena, wish that TTIP, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, had gone through, that we had sort of an infrastructure for strengthened ties between Europe and the United States. As sort of a weak follow-on to that, we have the Technology and Trade Council, which brings Europe and the United States together to try to address some of the open questions that were left unresolved by TTIP. In your new role, as you think about some of the economic challenges facing Europe and the US, and specifically Germany and the US, is there any low-hanging fruit? Is there anything that we could be doing better that we're not, that would be obtainable or achievable?
I think we could have agreed on finding a compromise to a question where we did not agree, that was production of green steel, the production of steel. There's an agreement between the European Union and the US on aluminum and steel. That agreement basically has expired, and we are just fixing it again and again without actually solving it. The consequence is that there are very significant duties that need to be shouldered by European industry in that context. So we're not happy about that. We could have, I think, from knowing the detail, I think we could have agreed on that in the context of the last EU-US summit. However, I also understand the election period or election campaign, not the hot campaign, but it had already started. And that is a moment where you don't want to be portrayed, probably standardly corrected here in the US, as handing over compromises to the Europeans. Maybe that's, I don't know. But there are low-hanging fruits. And like I said before, I think at the beginning of 25, we absolutely need to focus on this and fix it, because there is this wider question of the rules we are to follow when it comes to transatlantic trade. And here we've missed out. Here we need, I think, a firmer, more regulated base. And that is something where I can sense it's also increasingly felt on the US side, that we need something like this. Because at the end of the day, what really matters here, I think the deteriorating environment, global environment, politically, security-wise, brings us closer together. I've never seen, as a practitioner in foreign policy, I've never seen such a close operational cooperation as I've seen now among G7 members. G7 was a club where you would look at developments of the economy and, heads of government would chat a bit. Now it is a G7 cooperation that organizes and harmonizes the military support of Ukraine. And there are other examples where we have entered as the G7 into a much, much closer concrete cooperation than in the past. But if this happens, we need to stand on an agreed and sound economic platform. And we are not doing this. We are, at the moment, more or less improvising. And you mentioned the TTC. The TTC as a body that concentrates on trade issues between the US and the European Union, it is just an ad hoc mechanism. It's not a kind of forum that defines rules for the future to apply, and that's what we do.
Yes, let me ask you to introduce yourself and pose your question. There's a microphone coming.
Hello, Ambassador. Scott Tozier, former CFO for Albemarle Corporation. This week we have the election in Taiwan. Clearly a message was sent to Beijing through that election. With German tight relations with China economically, as well as your mission to strengthen the U.S. ties. Could you reflect on what kind of pressures that puts on the German mission?
You mean the China aspect?
Yes.
Yeah. I have to say, before I came here, and that's why I could also in some way relax when I came here, because I was tasked with writing and negotiating interagency-wise Germany's first China strategy. So we had to dive relatively deeply into the China context. And that big question, really, that is a question for this industry and representatives, elected representatives of government. To put it very simply, I think, the question is, have we invested too much into China? As also a lesson where we felt we should at least ask ourselves that question after we realized that we had invested too heavily into Russian fossil fuels. And against the backdrop of the attack on Ukraine, what we did was, over a period of 1 year, we moved away from Russian fossil fuels. Not only was that a big challenge in terms of pure management, it was also and continues to be a price issue. So we'll never be able to get back to cheap Russian fossil fuels. So on the basis of that kind of experience, I think we simply asked ourselves, have we over-invested into the Chinese market? What is going to happen? And maybe we should look from a government's point of view, take a look at some German companies where if the dreams of Xi realize or become reality by 2025, if we are exposed in a way that there are existential risks for the German economy, because these companies have become so dependent on their China business that it would break their back if they were to pull out. Now we were very, very careful. I think it was necessary to ask the questions. It's a different question what you are going to do vis-a-vis German business in that regard, because you have to be sensitive here. So the question we started to ask ourselves, and there the discussion still goes on in Berlin, was the question of, do we do special tests with companies, or do we invite companies to basically do relevant tests with themselves, where disruptions are being suddenly put into special scenarios and play through, so that you would know what kind of implications there are. At the end, I think I can assure you, we did not send a message of disinvestment, very clearly. This is not about disinvestment. The German economy, half of Europe's trade, half of all EU trade with China is German trade. So the size magnitude, US business is 250 billion euros. China business still is 300 billion euros for the German economy. So size-wise, you are not, it would be foolish to move away, but it would also be foolish not to be aware of the risk factors. And there are a lot of risk factors, can't go here into detail, that in various sectors need to be addressed and are being addressed now after we define a strategy for us. Because what is new about this strategy, it is not only about what happens in China, it is also about what China does with us at home. So what's the Chinese influence and the Chinese position in Germany? And I'm not speaking about illegal activities, I'm speaking about perfectly legal activities, which however matter in strategic and political terms. Now, I think here you realize that's exactly the question that is being asked here in the US. So there is a very impressive, I think, like-mindedness that has developed. And I may say, in all modesty, I think we received a lot of praise from the US administration for the type of China strategy which we developed. And last remark in that regard, that is a national strategy, but given the importance of the German economy in Europe, I think you can understand that this will be a shaping factor in a European context. And that's where the game is being played geostrategically. For the Chinese, Europe is crucially important as a market, as a production hub, and as an element in the kind of triangular relationship they have with the European Union and with the US. And so from that point of view, I think here again, we are on a very parallel path.
And I think as a footnote, I think there are also some incredible opportunities for greater alignment between Washington and Berlin when it comes to China moving forward. Other questions from the audience? Yes, I was going to come to your table next, but I am delighted that you raised your hand.
My name is Lennox Leduc. I am an 8th grade student at South Academy of International Languages, and I would like to know, what's your opinion on, instead of investing in the Chinese market, the Indian market? Seeing as it's a large country and there's probably a lot of opportunities there.
Right. I think this is probably a question you need to put to CEOs of large companies, how they feel about it, and not so much about a question you put to governments. Well, it's a bit like this. We've long lived with a situation where we feel politically, it is easier to deal with the Indians than to deal with the Chinese. And then it was much more easy to basically do business with the Chinese than to do, given all the red tape, do business with the Indians. I think this is a picture of the past, but it has shaped, I think, perceptions for a long, long time. Especially that element where you say, with China, it's really, really easy. Just look at the EV market and the articles you could recently read about this, and I think that corrects very much your impression. Sometimes it is very dangerous if things transit too quickly and are too fast, too easy, too smooth in a way. Now, when I look at a country like India, and I respect it a lot, in a certain way things are slower, they are speeding up recently. Things are slower, and in terms of disruptive development, I think, given that we face so much disruptive development in the world at the moment, that is even a good news. And I think we can grow that relationship in a slower way, but in a very profound and very important way.
Other questions? Yes. There's a microphone right behind you.
Hallo, mijn naam is Marlene und ich bin in die 6. Klasse bei North Academy World Languages. Ich lerne schon seit Kindergarten Deutsch. In my global studies class, we were learning about sustainable cities, and we were wondering how you would recommend for all the other cities to make their cities more sustainable.
Yeah, I have a very, because Steve was so kind and asked me about, why are you traveling? And I said, because I want to meet governors, I want to interact with state legislators, etc. It's not only the federal states that are, an object of desire here, it is also the major cities here in the US. And sustainable development, when I hear this, immediately I have, I think, an optimistic and positive reaction, because the German economy is just tailor-made for kind of logistical and infrastructure changes in the makeup of a city, for instance, whether it moves from sewage questions to clean water supply to public transport or whatever it is. I think in our portfolio you always find very important solutions when it comes to the development of infrastructure in a city context. And what we are looking at the moment is we have the ambition of developing a new format for the interaction between German and US cities. In the past, that very much had this element which is important of people-to-people contacts, but we realized and we learned that mayors and their administration are increasingly interested in best practices examples. So that's where we want to put them together, and we want to include German companies that also can provide solutions in that regard. Just to give you one, I met the mayor of Los Angeles, and she told me, oh, I will soon travel to Paris because I want to learn from Paris how a city in the context of mega events, develops infrastructure. And I said the next mega event is the Euro, the soccer championship in Europe, and that's being organized by Germany, the Netherlands, and Belgium. So maybe you would like to see us as well. So I think she will include that portion. The French were a bit over-eager in that regard.
If I might, I think that's an incredibly important point, and I really appreciate the question that relations between our countries are not just between the capital cities, but there is so much that's happening at the subnational level, at the state and local level. You see that here in Charlotte, you see it in North Carolina, and I think that there are lots of opportunities for that kind of exchange of practitioners to talk about issues like sustainable urban development or digitalization in the future work, the way in which our communities are facing many of the same challenges and can really learn from each other. I think we have time for one more question. Yes, over here on the far side. One more after that.
Ambassador, my name is Mike McNamara. I work with the World Affairs Council, and we are obviously thrilled to have you here today. Many of us appreciate the relationship that has developed for a long time in this area from international business. One of the things that I think I've learned is that all politics is local. And so one of the things that we learned this week is that our football team, our American football team, is coming to Munich next year. And so the question I have for you on a local level is, how do I get tickets?
Okay, write me a letter. No, that's usually difficult, in my professional biography, usually I was addressed with a question, how do I get tickets for Bayern Munich? That's different now, but where do I get my tickets for the Pittsburgh Steelers? Because that's the team because I simply went there, I met the owners, and I visited their stadium and also their kind of Hall of Fame. And I like the story about the kind of working class background of the team, plus the identity it's created between Pittsburgh as a city and the team. And I simply like, so I had to basically make my choice, and my choice was that in American football, so sad they went out, but it's Pittsburgh.
Good choice. So, gentlemen, there in the back.
Thank you, Ambassador. My name is Maurizio Ballico, and I was a former president of a German company here in Chad. My question is the following. I know that Germany is the most supportive country in Europe towards the transition to EV, electrical vehicles. The target for 2030, if I remember well, is 15 million cars, electrical cars, which is quite ambitious, probably one of the most ambitious in Europe. The question is the following. How will Germany handle the problem of supporting this business, but dealing with the disposal of the batteries, which would be a huge problem also in terms of the environment? Thank you very much.
Well, in the end, it won't be government authorities that are organizing the disposal. It will be private companies that do it. So again, it's about the relevant regulatory environment, and it's about the support scheme that is being developed in that regard. How we connect it, money-wise, financially, at the end of the day, so that the necessary money is available in the budget is a different question. Whether you let the consumer pay again and a certain portion is being used then to address this issue at a later stage, that's a question which, for all the obvious reasons, because now we're speaking about something that hurts, and usually you take the decision and then it should start to hurt the day before you have even taken it, in a way. If there's a time lag, we just experienced this in Germany. Those of you who don't follow it on a daily basis, we have very, very significant and wide-ranging protests of farmers in Germany because the government took a decision on the subsidy scheme for the diesel that is being used by the farmers, and that has triggered an enormous movement that is far more political than that very concrete reason. So my answer to you is we need to address it, obviously, but there are more pressing problems now, so that some of the elements of that decision that have to do with the question of financial offset, etc., will, I think, only be addressed at a later stage.
So, Ambassador Michaelis, maybe one final question that brings us back into the foreign policy arena and ties together a couple of things that we've heard today. LJ was talking about a visit by Fiona Hill here in Charlotte. I'm sure she talked about Ukraine and an upcoming event with the Ukrainian ambassador to the United States. You said in your comments that we can't afford to let Ukraine lose. As we look at the year ahead, not only with the U.S. election, but with European elections, EU elections, elections in 3 Eastern Germany states and all around the world. And as we think about some of the challenges that you've talked about, both economic and otherwise, how concerned are you about growing fatigue when it comes to supporting Ukraine, both in Germany, but also here in the United States?
Yeah, of course, I am actually concerned, and I'm concerned because I think, in principle, and that's a lesson of history, it's very, very difficult to continue in a war effort without seeing results, you know, and that's the situation in which we find ourselves at this moment. But we should never forget, because it's also a personal thing, that the sacrifice that is being made is first and foremost made by Ukrainians. And I think that's an aspect which is very often forgotten when it comes to the question, why were the Germans first a little slow in responding and defining their support for Ukraine, but now have really, really moved up. I think one reason is that we have now host 1,100,000 Ukrainian refugees in Germany. So you have a situation, given our size, 83 million, where you find in the supermarket, in the street where you live, just down the road, where you find Ukrainian families. And I think increasingly we are also able to interact with them. I mean, within a very, very short period, because it was at the beginning mainly women and their children that came, we had to provide schooling for them, and nobody was prepared for that. And it was not just to, you know, you have the challenge of fitting in an extra number of German pupils. Here, you had a language challenge at the same time. So I think that is, when you ask the question about Germany, I think that is a reassuring factor. It certainly is for me. The other is that our government, and at federal level, any future government I could think of, is a government that fully understands the security implications for Germany. We are, of course, also standing, you know, in solidarity with the Ukrainians, but let's be honest here. You know, what really, really moves us at the same time is that it is about security at the very center of Europe, and so that affects us strategically in Germany, and that's why we need to respond. It would be a huge mistake if we thought that, you know, the cheap answer, the easy answer is that we turn around and just move away from that theater. We can't. And that's last specific point. That's why the decision of the European Union to offer candidate status to Ukraine and also to be willing to start accession negotiations now, that was the last decision, are easily underestimated. That is one of the most important moves that have been made politically with regard to the future of Ukraine in recent months. Here we have to say months since the attack, since the Russian attack. Because I believe one of the reasons why it was easy or considered relatively easy by Putin to attack Ukraine was that it was not a politically marked territory. It was easy game, and that is different. Now, I think we clearly, not only in terms of NATO support, in terms of our bilateral support, but also by including them as a future member of the European Union, I think that puts a label on this, don't touch. All we have to do, and that's easier to say than to live, is that we act in the way that, you know, Ukraine remains strong enough to withstand all these pressures. And that's, of course, we very much hope that the U.S. will also continue the support we've seen in the past.
Thank you. Ambassador Michaelis, herzlichen Dank.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for this wide-ranging conversation. I think it's fair to say that we talked about a lot, but there's still a lot more to talk about. And I know that LJ will echo this. Charlotte would love to have you come back. changed, but I just want to thank ULJ also for partnering with the ACG to host the ambassador today. And with that, I'll turn it over to Al.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Steve.
Exceptional discussion. We very much appreciate it. Proud of our German-American relations, both business and personal. And with that regard, we're very excited about your visit, your comments. And on behalf of the World Affairs Council and the American Council in Germany, we appreciate all of you. Thank you for joining today. We want to bring topics to you. Please join us in doing so. And again, we thank you. Have a great afternoon, and we appreciate it.
Thank you.